Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
What crazy and weird stories do you need to tell? Episode 5. Was in Indonesia in 2010 and ate lunch at this one restaurant for a week straight. One day the owner comes and asks if me and this other guy who I was with if we wanted to come to a family get-together tomorrow. So, we say sure. Tomorrow comes and we go to the restaurant and there's like 50 family members and we all start walking down the street. We finally turned in cemetery and we're like WTF. Turns out a decade to the day they had buried the owner's grandpa in some tomb, and they were going to pull his remains out for some memorial ceremony. Now the weird part. The man is reaching into this tomb when I hear hey. Hey. You. I don't like your girlfriend. No way. No way. Think you need a new one. His phone ring is Avril Lavigne's girlfriend, and he starts walking around talking to whomever with his grandpa's femur in his hand like a cup of coffee. So, I play lead guitar with a small-time gigging blues band in the South. We get paid, but it's usually enough to cover our gas and the beer we drink. Not like we're a big deal, but it's huge fun. Anyhow, recently we got 2 shows lined up on 2 different days in Iowa, of all places. Hell yes, a road trip. The venue was supposed to take care of the lodging. We drove from close to Memphis to Dubuque, which was a long haul, and went to check into our rooms. Well, they only had 1 room for us. Oh no. It was going to turn out that I would have to share a bed with our bass player, a big and sweaty black guy. I'm a not sweaty white cowboy. I like the bass player and all but hate that. I made up some lie about snoring loudly and found another room that I paid for. It was a nice room, really. That evening, I had dinner and went up to my room. Big, nice bed, giant bathroom. I wanted to take some pictures of my big road trip, and so right before my shower, I took several snaps from around the place. Right before my shower, like where I was. The bathroom had these giant mirrors, which I didn't really notice as I was taking pictures of the big whirly bathtub. After I had texted those pics to my mom, she was kind enough to let me know that I had sent her an inadvertent in the bathroom mirror. I'm glad she let me know that before I put that on Facebook, though. I've told this story in an IAMA before. It's long, but bear with me because it truly is my most ridiculous and almost unbelievable story. I was walking home from a friend's house one morning after staying the night. I believe it was the summer after senior year, so I was 18 at this point. It was a decent walk from the outskirts of my small town into the town where I lived. I put on some music and headed towards home right as the sun was coming up. During the walk, I see these 2 dogs ahead, probably half-mile or so on a straightaway. A boxer breed and some sort of sheepdog. It's normal for dogs to be running around the field, so I laughed and kept walking towards them. Well, they eventually saw me as I was walking along the road. The key part to my left was a huge ditch filled with thorns. Maybe 5 feet deep and 10 feet wide. As they come close, the sheepdog ends up running away, but the boxer runs at me. Before I can say, "Who's a good boy?" the dog jumps up and scratches my arm and proceeds to try to maul me. As the dog jumps on me, I lose my footing and fall into the ditch. The dog follows me. I land on my back and see this dog lunge at my throat. I put my leg up and it latches on with its teeth, ripping around as I start kicking it in the face trying to free myself. I hear a car honking as I start to crawl away and see a car opening its back door to let me in. I dive in and land in 2 old ladies and a woman's lap. They are all wearing their church clothes. I'm in a car full of Jehovah's Witnesses. 2 men up front. They are all asking if I'm okay as I realize my arm and leg are bleeding all through their Sunday's best. They watched the dog's owner call the dog in and I got driven to the ER. The woman says, "High gift _of_G2J, We were in the same third grade class. I inform her I don't remember her and I'm sorry, but my mind is on other things like the pain I'm going through. On the way I called my mom to tell her. She doesn't buy it thinking I'm joking, but after I tell her it's real, she meets me there. I started getting carried into the ER and placed on a wheelchair. It didn't get a deep enough bite to require stitches, but it tore around my leg where the 3 teeth it had clamped on. I start getting lightheaded from losing not a lot, but a bit, plus I hate the sight of blood. Police arrive and so does my mom as they ask me questions, and it takes like 16 of those saline sprays to clean out my wound and stop bleeding heavily. But wait, there is more. 2 hours later we are driving to the spot with the police officers to point out where it happened. The Jehovah's Witnesses saw the house the dog was at and gave the police the address. A woman answers the door after the police knocks. The police officer explains, and she is hesitant but says Hannibal would never do such a thing. I look at my mom and mouth Hannibal, as my mom shakes her head. Hannibal peeks his head out and tries to break through the screen, barking and snarling at me. The police officer says, "I've seen enough," and we leave. The next day, the police officer returns and recommends I press charges. He did some looking around and on the land of the dog owners, they have a cage maybe 20 feet by 20 feet with 5 boxer breed dogs. I press charges, settle out of court for a few thousand. The owners get caught as part of a dog breeding for dogfighting in New York, clear across the country, for a man there. Don't know what happened to the owners after that. They left town shortly after the police took all the animals off the property. Sadly, most were put down due to viciousness. I got asked if I demand Hannibal be put down. I gave my recommendation of no because it's not the dog's fault it has owners. Dogs can be treated with kindness and survive. Who knows if they kept him alive though? Probably put down with the rest of them. That's the tale of how a car of Jehovah's Witnesses saved me from Hannibal and taking down a dog-fighting breeder. The end. My grandparents lived in Mississippi during the 1960s. During this time, the Freedom Summer Project took place, and so did the Freedom Summer murder, specifically a few people who were involved with the movement to progress civil rights. Well, my grandmother was pregnant with my dad, and went to church one morning after hearing of the horrific acts that had taken place so close to home, to find out their lifelong friends and Sunday school classmates were arrested for the brutal murders and stashing of the bodies in swamps and dams. The shock sent her into labor, and my dad was born 12 hours later. Yay, Dad! Then about a week later they were in emotional turmoil and without saying anything to their friends moved to Alabama, or a year later they were the last car to cross over the bridge at Selma, because the police officers saw my 1-year-old dad crying in the front seat and waved them through. After a few years they moved to Dallas, and 2 weeks later JFK was assassinated. My grandmother is now convinced she's cursed, and refuses to travel or leave the house. Christmas was full of stories and eye-opening explanations this year. During the day before my first 4-day weekend in middle school, I was 11, my dog ran outside, and I wanted to go out and get him. I was wearing short pajamas and decided to throw on some Heelys, those shoes with wheels in them, and go out to find him. As soon as I open the front door, my dog runs inside the house. Since I was still in my Heelys, I wanted to play outside. Being 11, I was not allowed to go outside when my parents weren't home, which they weren't, but I did anyway and convinced my brother to go with me. This is where it gets interesting. I had this incredible idiotic idea to ride my scooter with my Heelys, thinking more wheels equals more fun. I live on this long steep hill that can send you down it at high speeds. I took my scooter and rode down this hill, having both my feet to the side, using the wheels on my Heelys as training wheels at an unnecessarily high speed. Now, usually, when I go down this hill, I use my feet to slow myself down when I realize I go too fast, so my instinct was to lower my feet on the ground to slow down, but instead I flipped off my scooter and rolled to a stop in the middle of the road. My brother saw the whole thing and said he wishes he had it on video. I got up and inspected myself, crying as I did so, finding 4 gashes, on my stomach, 1 on my leg, 1 on my right arm, and one on my left hand. I still have a scar. A car that had seen the whole thing stopped and offered me a ride home. I declined, grabbed my scooter, and limped up the hill. My brother abandoned me, and I walked all the way back home, and my neighbor noticed me crying and called my mom. The next day, I went to the doctors, and apparently I had fractured my arm and had to wear a cast for the whole 4-day weekend, which is hard when you're an avid gamer. And that's the story of how I fractured my first bone, out of sheer idiocy. My old roommate just reminded me of this because of how freaking cold it is here right now. We lived on a levee on a river in Illinois, the Sangamon. There was a cold snap that froze the river all the way across, which doesn't happen unless it's really cold. Maybe a week or two later, the river ice had melted, centered out, to where there were large thick sheets of ice hugging the shore. We found one large enough to support our weight, grabbed a couple of long sticks, and pushed them off into the water. The sheet of ice was about 20 feet long by about 8 feet wide, probably a foot thick, and the river there behind our house was normally only about 3 feet deep. We were having fun, knowing we weren't in that much danger. Sure, it would have fallen into chilly water, but we were young, the water was shallow, and our warm house was right there. We started to become more confident, able to control where our ice raft went with our sticks/poles, that we decided to see how far we could go downstream. We could always push back to shore if we needed to. We got around a bend about a half-mile downstream when the ice raft broke in half. It had steadily been melting and losing volume, but still holding us up simply fine. When it broke, we decided to push back to shore, only to find that the river had deepened. We couldn't push off the riverbed anymore, and we were at the mercy of the current. We come up to another bend and find that the river still has ice all the way across it at this point. The current took us right into the middle of it. It was thin ice here, much thinner than the raft we were standing on. The river was ice-covered for a couple hundred yards downstream, shore to shore, and the water was still deep enough that our poles weren't touching bottom. We had no choice but to walk across the ice to the shore. He was lighter than me and went first, using our sticks to try to distribute his weight a little bit. If you've ever walked on thin ice, you'll know it makes pinging noises when it's getting ready to break, and it was making that noise a lot for him. He got closer to the shore where the ice was thicker, and it stopped. He tossed me the sticks, and my knees were literally shaking because I was so nervous. I outweighed him by probably 20 pounds. If the ice broke here, I would be in over my head and the current would have immediately pulled me under ice that stretched downstream with no way back up. I bucked up and made it to the thicker ice, collapsed on shore, shaking. Walked about a mile back to our place and got stupidly drunk. This is the stupidest way that I could almost have died, but the roommate has a story that tops this one. Walking back to the car after dinner, I noticed a pool table through a dingy window and felt the quarters in my pocket. Inside, sitting in a corner closest to the door, was an ornamental piano with a songbook propped up on the stand. Every note was out of tune, the keys were missing most of their caps, but the sustain pedal worked, and that's all you really need to pretend like you know what you're doing. I forgot about the pool tables and sat down to run through the only short couple pieces I've ever bothered to figure out. I was maybe 10 minutes sitting in the corner unnoticed before man walked up and thanked me. He was wide, dark, bald, and said the music had brought him to tears, that his wife had passed recently and that for that little time he had appreciated something again. I wanted to give him all of my attention, and we sat at the bar while I gathered more of his story. We hugged over and over again as the sorrows kept piling up. He told me how empty he was inside, that they had taken out literally everything they could of him. A kidney, a lung, a will to live. His name was Drew Sanchez, and he was a former boxer. People kept approaching to speak with me, but I couldn't disregard Drew. He showed me his supposedly $10,000 Rolex. He told me how he had been robbed the previous week while passed out drunk, and they'd taken his other watch as well as his car. We spoke a little Spanish. He told me how he'd been sleeping with the bartender. I bought us around. When I tried to settle up, I was told they only accepted cash but that there was an ATM across the street. Drew offered to show me the way, and I remembered him mentioning how he needed to visit the machine himself, so I figured, hey, win-win. I was first to approach and only took out enough to cover my tab. The transaction finalized and Drew began with, "Man, I hate to ask," and I immediately put my card back in to pull out some more. I handed him the $20 bill as he told me about his strip club addiction. We stood in the street as he asked if I was gay. He asked if I thought his new glasses looked nerdy. He told me how he had spent 10 years in prison for killing a man and showed me the nearby alley where it happened. He showed me the scar on his neck where the man had stabbed him and had me put up my fists to mimic the two-punch combo that ended the man's life. We were still standing in the middle of the road when he choked up and began to cry. He told me he never meant to kill anyone, and I had to embrace him as I dragged him away from the oncoming traffic. We made our way back to the bar and crossed paths with a lady he knew. The woman was about 6 foot tall with short, curly red hair, and a very unfortunate face. She was with a new man and Drew wanted to know whether he was treating her right. Yes, she replied, this new gentleman had beaten out of her ex, and all was right in the world. Drew and I exchanged numbers before splitting ways as he went next door to seek another form of short-term companionship, and I went back into the bar to finally play a couple games of pool. Last year I started a part-time college course. I met this girl there who I fancied and became good friends with. She lived far outside my city. I go to add her on Facebook and see she has one mutual friend who turns out to be a close friend of mine for 10 years. It is revealed that the girl is my friend's cousin, and we all had a good laugh about it. But wait, there's more. The girl had a boyfriend called Karen and I had a grudge against him because I fancied his girlfriend. I never met him. So, I started this new course after the summer in a completely different college, in a completely different part of the city, and met this guy and we hit it off great. We get to know each other really well and then it's revealed that it's the girl's boyfriend. So, we all have a bigger laugh about that. But wait, there's even more. So a couple of weeks ago I'm walking home from college and the girl I fancied bumps into me. We hadn't seen each other in a while. She tells me about this new course she's doing and then asks me if I know someone called Isaac last name, and I'm taken back because it turns out another longtime friend of mine called Isaac has a mom who was on the same course as the girl. WTF are the chances of that? Am I crazy? Am I the only one who finds this weird? Out of college I got a job at a small courier service. I had a small pickup with a camper top and was paid a straight percentage as a contractor. The majority of business was run-of-mill documents and supplies, but we were open to anything. One day my boss calls and asks if I'm squeamish. I'm not, so he tells me he has a new client, a surgical research institute that needs daily scheduled pickup at 4:45 in the morning that will pay me around $60 for about an hour of work. Hello to the yes. Turns out that this institute is a nondescript building in the city's medical center that attracts doctors from around the world to practice experimental surgery on cadavers. They have contracted with the huge hospital down the street to use their facilities for pre-surgery PET scans and need us to shuttle back and forth. I show up at their loading dock in the depopulated wee hours and ring the buzzer. The night maintenance guy opens the door. I ask him why there is a metal pen strewn with hay on the dock. They do some of the surgeries on live pigs. Okay. I had no idea what to expect, but I'm led to a morgue just like you see on the police shows. He opens one of the stainless steel doors and slides out the tray. I hold my breath, but what see is what looks like an industrial-strength gray garment bag about 4 feet long. Inside is a human head and torso with no arms or legs. We roughly put the bag into a giant igloo cooler, and I can feel the head and shoulders through the bag. I try not to think about it. He helps me load it onto the truck and I drive to the hospital loading dock. I drag the cooler onto my hand truck and wheel into elevators and an endless labyrinth of linoleum hallways to radiology. The tech and I load the bag onto the PET scan table. Turns out that bag is all plastic, so it never needs to be opened. The scan takes about 15 minutes, and the tech lets me watch the image being created in the control room. Very cool. We put the bag back in the cooler. I wheel it into the hall and there are patients waiting for scans who have no idea the previous client is in the igloo. I did this for the next few months until they made other arrangements. There was one incident with a leaky bag, and I would occasionally get glimpses of unbagged torsos or see pigs about meet their non-sausage fate. Once I actually transported 3 heads in a duffel bag, but mostly it was easy money. Just before I stopped, the night guy was fired. A doctor showed up early and found him cranking it on the conference room TV. Anyway, that's the story of how I became Igor. I'm so tired. January 3rd, Dad ends up in the ER. From 6:30 he goes from feeling bad to 7 o'clock, virtually no pressure, 50/50th chance. Emergency surgery for a ruptured stomach. No one really knows what happened. The doctor told me he had a hole in his stomach the size of, and he made a circle with both hands. Wednesday, he's recovering well. Remove the NG tube, he can eat liquids. Off to rehab on Friday. Thursday, ops, not so well. The digestive system is stopped, back with the NG tube, nothing by mouth. Next Wednesday, okay, try on the food again. Thickened liquids. Don't know why he has increased confusion. Probably move him to long-term acute care on Friday. Thursday, oh, no oxygen. That's what causes the confusion. Pneumonia. Back to ICU with partially collapsed lungs. Last Tuesday, coded. No pulse. CPR, got it started within 3 minutes, intubated, and back on the ventilator. Family needs to get here. Talk to hospice care. DNR in place if he codes again. His sisters come in to see him before he dies, and plan to stay through to the funeral. Wednesday through Thursday, awake and communicating through hand squeezes and head motions. Makes his wish to fight noticeably clear. Even gives an okay for a tracheotomy if needed. Friday, moved from ventilator to biped. Agitated until they took it off. Talked for 2 hours or so. Fully alert, removed the DNR himself. As long as it is reversible, they can do it. Told the nurse he had said I love you, which is actually absolutely true. Dad was finally back. Yesterday, trying to get him moved to LTAC or rehab. Insurance gives them fitness. But I took my last sub day off to deal with this and everything I've let dropped over the last month. Hopes high for recovery again. Today, seepage from his feeding tube. No more food or ice. Nothing by mouth again. Nothing by feeding tube. May need to go back into surgery. Staying in ICU. Might be leaking from the initial surgery site. I can't deal with this. I've tried not to be hopeful for anything since the second setback. But now, just when I allowed myself to think maybe he will come home, we're back to maybes. I'm so glad I'm off today as I am sitting here crying so hard. I'm so grateful to have these few extra days, but now I just want to curl up and hide. I'm so tired. The year is 1997 in the south side of Milwaukee. I was 5 years old. School just got out and usually I would wait for my brothers to walk with me home, but this time I wanted to be a big boy and walked home myself. I walked past this house with 5 furious guys banging on the front door. I paid no mind when all of a sudden I saw a guy jump out of the second-story window and land in front of me. This man took off and ran as fast as a bullet. The guys on the porch took notice and started chasing him. The guy zoomed into an alley out of my view and what I presume was the head honcho of the group of guys. One out of the group of guys pulls out an Uzi, can't remember the exact gun but it was automatic for sure, and boom. He let that rain. I never heard anything so loud in my life. I was shaking so hard and filled with so much fear that I couldn't move. I wasn't able to see if the guy got shot from my position, but as I passed the alley after my paralysis wore off, I seen him lying there tipped over trash cans and there was so much blood on the ground. I felt so bad for the guy who got shot because I would see him around the neighborhood, and he was a cool kid. He would play basketball and football with me and my brothers in our alley. This was in the south side of Milwaukee, which was riddled with gangs and violence. I was walking home from Grant Elementary School. You bet I never walked home alone again. I know this isn't that crazy of a story and people see this stuff every day, but it's haunted me every day of my life. I'm now 26. My parents moved us down to Florida a few years later. I spent Christmas this year unemployed thanks to a rumor. In mid I got a promotion at work that I really wanted and was ecstatic to get it. I started my job on Wednesday and on Monday the following week I was called into my boss's office where I was promptly fired on the spot, no explanation, just a lecture on my poor behavior and my boss expressing how disappointed he is in me. 2 weeks later I ran into a former coworker, and we sat back and chatted about what happened after I left. My boss had promoted this girl to my spot and told me something very fascinating. Turns out the girl who was promoted had filed a complaint against me saying that I had threatened to go to my car, grab my shotgun, march her into the bathroom and saw her. I'm an openly gay man who regularly commuted by bus to work and most everyone there knew that. So, Monday morning at 4:19, I noticed a truck parked across 3 parking spots. He was also parked in my manager's spot. We are very protective of our spots. A police officer happened to come into my store to use the bathroom. I asked him to check on the guy and ask him to move. I assumed he would be drunk and asleep. Turns out he had 6 grams of coke in him. They were portioned out, ready to sell. If he had just parked normally, he would have been fine. Now he's in jail for multiple accounts. Whoops. When I was a small child of 8 to 10 years, my dad got super into sailing. He bought a used 20-foot sailboat that had sat unprotected for a few years and was a mess. We spent a whole summer fixing it up as a project, and then we would sail around the Hudson River until he sold it and used the funds to buy an even bigger boat. It was a 34 feet long boat and it was basically as wrecked as the first one. 2 summers and many trips to Home Depot later it was actually pretty nice, and we would take it out on weekends. We kept it at a local marina. At this marina you could buy a slip, $, or you could get a mooring ball, $, which is a big anchor in the river attached to a floating plastic ball that you tie your boat to. When you want to use it, the marina has a man that ferries you out to your boat and picks you up when you're done. We got a mooring ball. Everything was fine until the marina was sold to some shady people who started doing illegal stuff like tripling the rent and holding people's boats until they paid up. Our boat was one of the boats being ransomed. My dad and I were talking about it, and I suggested that we just get there at 4 a.m., swim out to the boat and steal it back. My dad suggested instead that maybe we should get one of those fake pool toys, the ones that are covered in warnings saying, "This is not a real boat, you idiot," and row the few hundred feet out to our mooring ball. A few days and one pool toy later we wake up super early. My mom drops us off up the road, we carry the deflated boat past the closed marina and walk down the river until we reach the bit of shore closest to our boat and we start inflating the dinghy. We don our orange life preservers and start rowing out. About a minute I started to get wet, and I began to complain. My dad responds retro, "It's 5 a.m. and we're in a goddamn river, you're going to get a little wet, keep quiet, we're almost there," and minute or two later, "Oh no, it's leaking." We had ripped the bottom of the pool toy, and it was slowly filling with water. To make things worse, we started to see flashlights and hear shouts from the shore, we had been spotted. While we're rowing the rest of the way to our boat in our slowly deflating and leaking pool toy, we hear an engine start up. It was the ferry guy who normally takes us out to our boat pulling out of the marina while shouting at us. We climb onto our boat. We have an orange gas can be full of gas and my dad is frantically filling up and starting the sailboat's dinky outboard motor while I untie the boat from the mooring ball. We get underway and we're about as fast as ferry guy, so he awkwardly chases us for 45 minutes shouting the entire time before giving up and turning around. We then spent the next day sailing upriver to another marina. I got to meet Jay Leno this summer. I'm a big car dork and I was visiting LA in a few months and wondered if he does tours of his car collection or something along those lines. They don't, private collection. So, I decided to write him a letter essentially saying that I'll be in LA from this week and if you happen to have any free time and wouldn't mind showing me around your garage, it would be greatly appreciated. If not, no worries. I left my cell phone number at the bottom of the letter in case someone decided to call. About a week and a half later I get a call on my phone and the person on the other end says, "Is this Josh?" And I replied, "Yes, who is this?" And he says, "Oh, it's Jay Leno." And I kind of freaked out. So, we talked for about 5 minutes, and he said, "So when you're in town give me a call and we will make it happen." So, my family and I got to tour his garage and one of his mechanics let it. It took about 2.5 hours, talked to some mechanics, and saw what they were working on. At the end of the tour Jay pops out to say hello and we chat about cars for 15 minutes or so. And that was that. One of the greatest days of my life. I was doing an inspection at a home. Didn't know who it was as I was doing 3+ inspections every day. So, I pulled up to this man's home. He is standing in the yard to greet me. I, as any good Southern man does, give the guy a solid handshake, look him in the eye, and say, "I'm Ron, nice to meet you." "Richard Tucker. Nice to meet you," is what he said to me. My body ceases to function as my brain runs at Mach speed. Richard Tucker. Richard. Dick. Dick Tucker. Holy stuff. This guy's name is Dick Tucker. Naturally jokes start pouring through my brain. My favorite being "You Were Great" in Silence of the Lambs. It was a fantastic film. So anyway, somewhere between 5 seconds and 4 minutes later I regain consciousness. I realize I'm still holding Dick Tucker's hand. I look at him. He looks at me. I know what he's thinking. He knows what I'm thinking. You know what Dick Tucker said to me? Nothing. Like a man, and I respect the stuff out of him for it. My girlfriend, of 1 month, we'll call her Christy because that's her name, and I were by the beach skate park, sitting in the sand, taking pictures with our phones, making memories, and enjoying the sunset at Venice Beach, California. After the sun finished setting, around 4 to 6 police cruisers rounded up around us and the skate park. Of course, I know they're not there for anything we did wrong, as this was the skate park's closing time and serious stuff tends to happen in this area, especially with the large homeless population and crime in this city. Seeing police is not uncommon. However, I decided to be playful with my new GF and shout, "Oh no, they caught me, let's run," as I jump up from the sand and grab tug on her. She responds better than I imagined. Frantically saying what, she rushes and picks up her things, completely falling for my joke. We run in the sand halfway back to the boardwalk, while she's feeling in her purse for something unknown to me. She says to wait and proceeds to stop as we almost make it off the sand. As I wait and turn to her, I notice she keeps on fidgeting in her purse and mentions that she doesn't have her iPhone. The sinking feeling that I may have caused my new girlfriend to drop her phone in the sand due to my lame police joke creeps up on me. So, logically, we turned back towards the shore into the skate park to look for it in the sand. The thing is, the sun literally just set. There was barely any light outside, and it was getting darker each minute. Additionally, the police cruisers just drove by where we thought we were sitting, disturbing the sand. We searched in the sand for as long as we could visibly see but could not find it. We have to stop because my Nexus phone died, so we no longer had a phone flashlight/torch to use. To make matters worse, she had a 12 a.m. Cinderella-style curfew, and we were about an hour away from home. She was losing faith in us finding it pretty quickly. Finally, she gave up on finding, and began pressuring my stubborn self into giving up as well. At this point she was already considering her backup phone options. Also, I was very tired because I only had 4 hours of sleep the night before due to a decent number of recreational activities. Defeated, I drove 50 minutes back to her house and dropped her off at home. I went to my house about 25 minutes away to charge my phone. It was now around 11:30 p.m. At this point, I was still incredibly determined I could find it. Assuming the phone is still buried in the sand somewhere, I debate to myself about whether I should go back in the morning to look for it again or drive back right now to try to find it. My thought process was that if I wait until the morning, at least I'll have sunlight to help light up my search area. However, the longer I wait, the more I risk someone else finding it and taking it for themselves. I resolved myself, and I sent a Facebook message to Christy and told her to launch the Find My iPhone app. And sure enough, it's somewhere in the sand, with only 12% left. So, it's now or never. By the morning it will most likely be dead and there will be no way to pinpoint it. She had already given up at this point and did not want me to go, but being very motivated and stubborn, I defy her and go anyway. I know the beach is technically closed at this time and most likely being patrolled by the city police, so I decided to dress in all black to camouflage better at night, along with equipping myself with a small pocket knife just to make myself feel safer. 50 minutes later, I'm at Venice again, which feels pretty unsure due to nighttime ghettos, homeless people, strange people, and police officers everywhere as predicted. At this point, Christy screenshots the location depicted in the app and sends it to me. For some reason, the Find My iPhone thing does not give coordinates, and the symbols that represent the key spots on the map are completely different between the Android Google Maps app and the Find My iPhone map. Basically, I'm trying to base the location of the phone from the represented skate park on both maps, but it's nearly impossible for me because the symbols are so different. What I took from the pictures and information I had was that, A, the phone should be located halfway between the boardwalk and the ocean, and B, I should find it if I park on Horizon Cut and walk straight towards the ocean and a bit to the right. In a rush, I park my car in a red zone on Horizon Court, because apparently even at night, it's nearly impossible to find parking this close to where I need to be. Arriving at the beach, I notice the boardwalk is lit but the shore is pitch black and waves look scary crashing at night. I pass by the groups of homeless and get to the sandy shore. I see a bright light like 40 plus feet away from me on the sand, in the direction of the shore and a bit to my left, coming from what I assume is a patrol truck. Not willing to get caught and waste an hour's worth of gas and time, I drop on my belly to avoid them. On my belly, I can't understand something clearly at last anymore, so I know that they cannot see me. As a result, I crawled on my belly army/COD style on the sand straight from Horizon Cut to the halfway point. I have flashlights with me this time, so I don't have to depend on my phone light. When I reach the halfway point, I don't see anything aside from sand, but I'm fairly sure I'm at the most accurate location I can be according to the information I have. At this point, I message Christy on Facebook. 6% on the battery left according to the Find My phone. It was now time. I told her to make it ring. A minute goes by and all I hear are waves crashing. I'm not using my lights at this point to avoid giving off my location to patrol cars. I zone in on the sounds of the beach and try to drown out the sound coming from the boardwalk. I listen more closely and then I hear a faint high-pitched noise. In the direction I came from. I shine my light in that direction, but I see nothing but sand. So, I took a step towards the direction of where I initially walked from, towards the boardwalk. Sure enough, it gets louder. Less than a foot away from where I was, I see a lump of sand that seems a bit more elevated than the sound around it. I kneel down, put my hand in the sand, and out comes the phone. I told her to shut off the sound and I took it back to my illegally parked car. Finally, an hour later, I successfully delivered the package back to her doorstep. I went to a friend of a friend's cabin somewhere in Alberta, Canada one time in high school. Me and 3 friends were walking around drunk, and we saw someone shooting fireworks a little way off, so we walked over to them. We met these 3 dudes who were just blazing like no tomorrow, and we introduced ourselves and hung out with them all night. We went from one dude's little apartment/flat to one of the other dude's houses. We walk in, first thing there is inside is a gigantic ping pong table with a pyramid of Budweiser boxes stacked up, and a giant pile of weed on the counter. We proceeded to smoke more weed and blast Lamb of God and other metal through his sound system, had a high-five contest where we would high-five each other as hard as we could until someone flinched, and then we drank and smoked some more. It was incredible. Last summer, I spent a couple of weeks on my grandpa's childhood farm in North Dakota. It was honestly the best and worst 2 weeks of my life. For one, I ended up slipping on a rock and falling into the river on the third day while fishing, ruining my phone and temporary fishing license. I was also really cold. I also crashed my dirty bike and came home severely bruised and unable to move properly for a week. But the craziest thing that happened a week into the trip. Before I continue, my great-uncle and his wife used to live in the old farmhouse, but the old farmhouse had mold problems and had never been renovated since it was built in the early 1950s, so they built a manufactured home about 30 yards away from the farmhouse, and for the past 5 years, my grandpa and his siblings have been working on renovating the farmhouse themselves. The farmhouse is small, 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom upstairs, with a small kitchen and living room. It has a garage connected, as well as a basement, which used to have rooms, but had to be gutted due to mold. The house is especially important to my family, and so far the renovations have been great. There is no more mold, the bathroom is completely remodeled and modern, all of the walls upstairs are repainted, and the family spent a lot of money putting in modern furniture. For this summer trip, as much as I didn't want to, I was put in the manufactured home, while my grandparents and my little brother were given a room in the old farmhouse. I didn't want to be in the manufactured home because it was storm season, and for anyone who hasn't been in western North Dakota during the peak summer storm season, those storms get really gnarly, and there was no way in hell I was staying in a manufactured trailer home during those storms. I still had my laptop and iPad, and my great-aunt watched the news every morning, so I was very aware of the weather. So, when the weather forecaster predicted very severe storms for us one night, I didn't hesitate to move my stuff to the old farmhouse and sleep on the living room couch. I planned to sleep anyway. My grandpa tried telling me that the news was just sensationalized stuff, and I would be simply fine in the trailer house with my great-aunt and third cousin, who was also staying there. But I refused. Call me a pussy, but I could just feel it in the air. It was hot and muggy that day, and I just knew something big was coming, whether or not the news said it. My grandpa just shrugged, and at around 10 p.m., went to bed with my little brother. I sat at the living room table on my laptop, playing World of Warcraft and listening to some hunting podcast on YouTube, with the window behind me open to let in some chilly night air. The farmhouse didn't have AC except for this little window unit in the kitchen, which was pretty terrible at its job, but whatever. I could still feel it. I lost track of time, but all of a sudden, a massive gust of wind hit the house, and the curtain slapped me really hard on the back of my head. I was so startled that I jumped up and smashed my knees below the table, before spinning around to slam the window shut. I heard my grandpa get up to close the windows in the kitchen and make sure the window AC unit was secure, which it wasn't, so my grandpa took it out. About 30 seconds after the wind gust hit, the power went out. I live right up against the foothills in Colorado and have otherwise lived on the plains my whole life, yet I've never heard or seen such a powerful wind. The lightning was also ridiculously frequent too, so I didn't even need a flashlight to see. I knew the internet was knocked out, so my grandpa let me tether my iPad and laptop to his phone's 4G, so I could still keep track. My grandpa and I stood in the kitchen for a good 10 minutes, just memorized by the storm. My grandpa spent the first 22 years of his life on his farm, and came back frequently when he moved, and he said he never saw a storm nearly that powerful before. With each lightning strike, we could see that most of the trees on the farm were bent at 90-degree angles at least, and the grass was just flattened by the wind. My grandpa reasoned that if the storm got any worse, we would go to the basement, but otherwise we'd be okay. Later on, I found out my grandpa wanted to go to the basement, but my little brother is overly sensitive to emotions, and we didn't want to freak him out. So, my grandpa returned to his bedroom to lay down with my brother, while I returned to my laptop in the living room. For the next 4 hours, all I could hear was what sounded like a jet engine roaring around the house. The wind drove the rain sideways, and even straight up just below the roof. I saw the rain circling below the lip of the roof of one of our sheds in the lightning when I looked outside. I also noticed our trees by the road didn't look nearly as full as I remembered them. I tried to distance myself away from the window, and just tried to ignore the storm. We didn't get any warnings for a long time, which I found strange. However, I did find a website that connects to all of these little individual weather stations in my local area. I clicked on one that must have been on top of the Garrison Dam, which had a wind gust clocked in at about 115 miles per hour. I think I just went numb at that point. The dam was less than 10 minutes away from us, so if it was getting gusts like that, chances are, we were too. After 4 hours of what I can only describe as feeling like I was in some horror movie, the storm slowly subsided. I was so tired though, that at about 3:30 a.m., a half hour before the storm finally began to calm down, I decided to lay down. I put my laptop down on the coffee table and went over to a little side table in a corner by the TV, where I had my motocross helmet. I took my dirty bike with me to the farm and rode it around. I remembered my dad told me a story about surviving a tornado with his motocross helmet on, when he was a kid, and decided that if it really hit the fan, I would be prepared. I fell asleep on the couch, in my motocross helmet and cowboy boots, just in case we had to go to the basement, with a live radar on my laptop on the coffee table, and woke up when the lights and fan turned back on. By then, it was 4:30 a.m. I could still hear some wind and rain outside, but it didn't sound nearly as terrifying as before, so I just turned off the lamp, closed my laptop, and went to sleep. My grandpa woke me up at about 9 a.m. the next morning, and told me everyone was okay, and breakfast was waiting for me in the trailer. I groggily got up, took my helmet off, and stumbled next door. There wasn't nearly as much damage as I was expecting, though a few of our lawn chairs were missing, and plenty of tree limbs were downed. My great aunt said it was one hell of a scary night for her and my third cousin, but they were okay. However, my great aunt's daughter called crying, to tell us that a friend of hers was killed by the storm, when his camper blew over on top of him at the lake. That ended up in the news. Also, we found out that a farmhouse less than 5 miles away from us literally got blown apart by the storm. The only reason the family survived is because the father had a shotgun, which he used to shoot the basement door to equalize the pressure and get his family to safety. That story in particular really haunts me, because if the roof would have been torn off our farmhouse, we had nothing to break down our solid wood basement door, which would have been impossible to open considering the pressure differences. The storm we were hit by also spawned massive tornadoes in Montana and South Dakota. I'm fairly sure our roof was a wind gust away from being torn off our house, and I'm extremely thankful to God that we were all safe and alive in the end. My grandpa doesn't doubt me or the news anymore. I was working on a container ship around 2013 or 2014 and my ship pulled into Savannah, Georgia. I went out to a bar with my watch partner at the time. He was an American, but he was telling me how he worked all over the world, including at a gold mine in a place called Kalgoorlie, Australia back in the 80s or 90s. Well, suddenly a group of about 5 young Australians walk into the bar and sit down near us. We're drinking and chatting with them when the topic of work comes up. Turns out the Australians work at the same gold mine that my colleague used to work at, and they're in the US for a vacation. My watch partner starts naming off people that used to work there. Oh, that guy is the supervisor now? He used to clean the stuff. And so forth. I thought it was such a coincidence that we happened to meet at this bar on the other side of the planet. I think I saved a guy from being murdered. Last month at 3 a.m., I was driving for Uber and had a pickup in the neighborhood I grew up in. The pickup spot was at an intersection instead of an address, which is strange but not unheard of. When I got there I didn't see anyone waiting, so I turned right down the street and slowly inched my way of about 4 houses. When I looked in my passenger side mirror, I noticed a black guy appeared on the side of the road, so did a 3-point turn to get back to him, figuring it was my passenger. Before I could finish my 3 points turn though, I got a call from the passenger, which was weird because the black guy on the side of the road wasn't holding a phone. The person on the other end of the phone was yelling in a whisper that the black guy isn't him. As I'm being told this, the black guy is just standing directly across the road staring at me with a blank expression, not even walking towards my car. The passenger on the phone tells me he is actually hiding in the bushes next to the stop sign where I first turned on the street. Passenger then yells 3 more times that the black guy isn't him and directs me pull up to the stop sign ASAP. I drove past the black guy to the stop sign, and a white kid in his mid-20s jumped out of the bushes and sprints to my back seat. He was clearly terrified and shaking. I asked WTF was going on, and he said he met a girl online who sent him pictures and told him to come over, but to get out at the intersection and walk to her house because her parents were sleeping. When he got out of his original Uber at the corner, he noticed the black guy standing there waiting for him in the same spot the girl's house would have been. Nervous, he called the girl to see what the deal was. She said there was no guy and pressured him to walk down the street. She tried multiple times to get him to walk towards the black guy, but the passenger knew something was wrong. He then ran back around the corner and jumped in the bushes, at which point he called an Uber, and that's when I showed up. With him now in the car, we sat about 50 yards away for at least 5 minutes, and the stranger never flinched or walked away. He just stared at us and sped away. I lived in that area for 15 years. There are maybe 5 black people in the whole town. The guy absolutely did not live there. I have no doubt something bad would have happened to the passenger if he had listened to the girl and walked to where the guy was waiting for him. One night while extremely stoned about a year ago, I thought I visualized a unique way to see how gravity works. I actually thought I discovered the reality of the universe. When I woke up the next day, I couldn't believe that it all still made sense to me. Since then, I've been researching and putting all scientific theories to the test with thought experiments to see how my concept would work. There's nothing I haven't been able to explain about it. My background at the time was a double major in chem and biology, so explaining it through physics and math wasn't conceivable yet. Currently, I'm doing chemical engineering, and these abilities have only grown. But, instead of just letting my concept out free in the world, I decided to do something entirely different. I'm writing a science fiction novel where the main character must learn to see and use this concept. The story has been growing and evolving over the past year, and it's basically done in my head. I only have about 30,000 words on paper, but when I have time I keep adding to it. The craziest part is I never wanted to write, but the concept and story idea feels so good that I feel obligated to. Every time I picture the concept, my hair stands up and I get excited and giddy like a kid. When I have epiphanies, I have a feeling of bliss I've never had before. I've screamed with my hands in the air before while alone, and I'm a very reserved person. It doesn't disprove any current widely agreed upon theories, but it actually unites the 4 fundamental forces. I probably sound like a total quack, and it's possible what I'm picturing in my head isn't even possible for a reason I don't see. If it turns out science isn't entirely there, at least I'll have a science fiction novel that uses real science to explain magic, and one that I've been extremely excited to imagine and write. After college, I decided to take about 6 months off from life, moved to a big city, and waited tables to pay the rent. During that time, I met some people, and started dating my husband. I also befriended several people where I worked, including a recurring customer. He was a professional-looking, khaki and polo-wearing guy, maybe in his 30s, who knew I was about to look for a real job. I had a legal background, and he said he could use someone like me in his business in sort of an office manager role, but also reviewing documents, investments, and such. I sold my car to move to the city, so he said because of his tax situation, it would be easier for him to lease a car in the business name for me and pay me a lower salary. Then, he proposed that I could use the car to run errands and such for business, but I'd also have it for personal use. Other than this guy's name, I knew nothing about him. The internet wasn't what it is today, and cell phones were analog, meaning, I couldn't really research him. Plus, I was a naive 21-year-old. Because I didn't have a car, I took the train to the location he told me, or he then picked me up for my first day of work. Instead of bringing me to his office, he took me to a BMW dealership to pick out a car to lease. No paperwork was signed. We drove around, where he told me about different projects he worked on, but we never went to his office. He then took me out to lunch, or I'm 99% sure he drugged my one drink. We were in a restaurant, where he knew the owners, who in my best estimation were Russian, and the restaurant a cover for the Russian mob. They spoke to each other in a language I could best guess was Russian, with the owner constantly glancing over at me. We then left in his car and drove around some more. I distinctly recall feeling so out of it that I had to lay my head on the center console of his SUV. At some point, my gut instinct kicked in, and I jokingly told him that I hope you're not trying to kidnap me, because I wrote your license plate number down before we left and gave it to my boyfriend. I never actually passed out, but he drove me all the way home. I ran inside to try to write down his license plate number, but I was so out of it that I just couldn't. And I never saw him again. That is the day I believe I was nearly sold into a Russian trafficking ring. I was very naive then and didn't come to this conclusion until months later. One of the biggest mysteries of my life and bothers me to this day. I was in Hawaii on the road to Hana about 2 years ago. I will begin by saying the day was already weird because it was raining super hard and one of the roads washed out right in front of our car, and the guy in the car on the other side came out to start moving the debris. That guy was Weird Al Yankovic. We know because my boyfriend asked, "Are you Weird Al?" As they were moving debris and Weird Al said yup and just kept moving debris. Flash forwards a few hours later, another road is closed. I run down the road to ask if there is another way out, and the only person in sight is this older man who looks just like Willie Nelson. I did not want to ask if he was Willie Nelson because I thought that might be rude since a lot of older guys in Hawaii prob look like that, and I figured my mind was just in a weird celebrity spotting mode because of the Weird Al thing. Plus, what are the odds? He said the road usually opens up again after the rain dies down, and I thanked him and walked back to the car. I was alone, almost positive it was Willie Nelson, but I can't say for sure, and it will always puzzle me.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.